countdown, operating weather. So have you guys done any real-time like live pricing or based around inventory, or, I mean, that's a little bit more sophisticated, but have you guys done that or thought about that? Is that on your roadmap?
Yeah, so we have done all those things. Low inventory is always a good one because you can put kind of like an urgency on it, like get it before it's gone or hurry, or even targeting people specifically who had purchased that product before. So they're more likely to buy it if they liked it, and they might even buy more than one pair. So countdown clocks, those are great, especially around the holidays, to push that urgency again. How much time do you have left for your sale?
Okay, Matt, have you guys?
Yeah, we use Live Clicker for our real-time dynamics. So obviously, countdown clocks are pretty ubiquitous at this point. I find that for us, countdown clocks will work when it's an actual deadline. So like counting down to, in a reminder to my mom's birthday is going to be more impactful than a countdown to the end of a promotion that my customer has been trained to know that another one is coming, down the pike. We had some good success with device targeting. So obviously, in a world where people are talking about mobile first, I think that we're then potentially leaving, desktop isn't perfect if you basically are trained to scroll and scroll and scroll. So using device targeting, we're able to not only kind of cater the content to the device that's opening it, but also we have an app for Android, we have an app for iOS. Typically that content is way below the fold because we don't really know what device you're opening on. If we know you're on iOS, that's going to go right up to the top, and we saw a lot of people, or much higher rate of people downloading the app based on that.
Okay, great. So let's talk about, can you guys share some best practices when leveraging dynamic content? Bethany, you want to start?
Sure. I think starting out, before you do anything like this, you should definitely set goals. Like, why am I doing this? Because if you don't know why you're doing it, you're not going to succeed at anything. You're not going to know what to measure. So setting a goal, knowing why you're doing this, who your customer is, knowing your data is accurate to be able to populate the content. And then, again, not doing it if it isn't necessary. I think people have kind of talked about this before and alluded to that. I mean, it is simple to do, but it can be overbearing, and you can give them too much information to the point where it's creepy. So not making it creepy, not being big brotherly, and then measuring out your success after.
Okay, great.
So I think typically when I start to think about dynamic content, I'm first going to try versioning. So let's say we built a dynamic template within our ESP to say, we want to give different versions based on age and gender, whether or not they're a rewards customer. So when you just send out a single template, it's very difficult to gauge what content is working for who. When I go to my creative team and say this is going to be the male version versus the female version, and they come back and the only difference is the button is pink for the female version, that's something where I'm like, why are we doing this? Let's test it. Let's make sure that it is impactful. And I think, again, when you're doing something dynamically, you potentially lose a bit of insight into what's working for who. So I think at first, typically we'll version things out. So I'll have the younger males, younger females, older females, and really see what's working for those groups. And then once we kind of have a tried and true approach, then we roll it into a dynamic template to really ease the workflow on that.
Okay. Yeah, to add to that, definitely A/B testing in smaller groups and not pushing something out to your entire audience before you know what's really working.
Okay, great. So we know also within dynamic content, it can be pretty complex. So can you guys talk to us a little bit about which teams you guys might have to collaborate with or to make this happen, to execute it, because obviously you can't do it by yourself. So who do you guys rely on within your department to make this happen?
So we have a pretty small digital marketing team. I actually do some of this myself, and then we have a coordinator and then designers, and we all use the platform and know how to use it. So it's really just a few of us. We come up with the creative ourselves, we do the testing ourselves, and then we do the execution and the analyzation.
So how much planning would you say, Bethany? Like you're going to launch a dynamic content. Like how much planning do you need time-wise?
For a larger campaign, I mean, we can pull it together in about a week, but
Okay.
we're doing we're populating dynamic content daily.
Great. So Matt, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we work with our creative team, our merchandising team, our data and analytics team. I think that some of our dynamic content is more using artificial intelligence. We use Salesforce Marketing Cloud and predictive intelligence, I Go Digital, for product recommendations, and kind of interesting there. So we assume if we're serving up more relevant subproducts below the hero, that it's going to increase the dollar per email. And we started testing into it, and we were just seeing kind of fairly flat results, which was very discouraging. In seeing that, then we broke out our segments based on our rewards customers, rewards tier, and basically we found that the more a person was on our site, the more relevant information they were giving us, and therefore the dynamic product recommendations were more relevant to that customer and actually able to move the needle. So we saw with like our highest tier rewards customers, by serving up product recommendations based on their on-site behavior, a good lift in dollar per email, whereas for a customer who's on our site twice a year, it's not really an effective tactic.
Okay, great. So that was going to be my next question around testing. So Bethany, do you have any good testing examples that you've managed?
So our browse abandonment emails, when I first started working there, we were just showing what products people were looking at, and I was looking at the data, and I'm like, these people never added to cart. So they were interested, but not completely interested enough to add their product to the cart. So why don't we try and upsell them or show different shoes from that category or that brand that they might possibly be more interested in actually purchasing? And the click-through rate and the conversion rate went through the roof just by testing that. So.
All right. Yep. Matt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think 1-800-Flowers is in an interesting position where we're gifting. So the people that you're gifting for are probably going to be different each time or potentially different each time. So trying to use data to then basically cater the dynamic content to the individual becomes difficult. So we've done a decent amount of testing, again, with regards to the amount of times you're on site, and then looking at the recipient that you purchased for, the occasion that you purchased for this time last year. We really firmly believe that you got to test everything, that you really shouldn't just make assumptions. So, with the age and gender segmentation that we're doing, we were relying actually on our merchants to provide products for older males versus younger males. And, we found that they were coming back with, let's say, customized beer steins for the older males, but we're actually not a whole lot of our customers are buying for themselves. So more likely the older males are looking for red roses for their wife for their anniversary, something to that effect. So, in testing kind of proved out some false assumptions, and we're able to then kind of go in and make some tweaks.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. So let's talk about some of the challenges you guys have faced when leveraging dynamic content or potential pitfalls.
One issue we had was actually just with an FTP. It was pushing over product that we no longer had inventory of and recommending it. So that obviously isn't good. But other than that, we really haven't had any hiccups. So, but like he said, I mean, we test everything before we push it live, and A/B testing and really analyzing your data to see what your customer is doing and acting on their behaviors, and not just, like, for example, like you said, what the merchandisers are saying you should do this, because they might not be seeing the entire picture and the customer's social behavior and mobile behavior and website behavior.
I mean, for us, I guess I have a couple of responses. First is the personalization, the dynamic content's really only going to be as good as the data. So if we have demographic data that we're purchasing for a third party, how trustworthy is that? And then if you're going out kind of overtly, like I think one of our subject lines said something about like, hey dudes, for guys. And like, of course, the female copywriter gets that one in her personal inbox and is like, you guys aren't doing it correct, The other example I'll give is just with regards to like reminders. So gifting can kind of be touchy. Relationships change, people pass away. So if all of a sudden I'm reminding you about a birthday of somebody who passed away, that can really turn you off to our brand completely. So as much as those emails can drive a lot of good sentiment and customer trust, it can also leave a bad taste in their mouth if we don't kind of have our finger on the pulse of how their relationships are changing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm curious, how do you guys recover from that? Do you send oops emails, or what do you guys do to make it right or to recover?
So I do get the replies to our emails, and I always flat out admit, yep, we made a mistake. And people love that, like that one-to-one relationship. Oh, the brand is actually listening to me, and knowing that there's human error and there is a person on the other end. I think that's very appreciative. So, I mean, if it's a mass error, we will send out an apology email, but the one-to-one connection for like the one-offs, like you were talking about, if someone has passed away, that people really appreciate that human contact.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, especially with dynamic, it's sometimes difficult to figure out exactly who got the wrong message.
Right.
So it's not like you can just send a bulk, oops, sorry, email.
Yep.
Similar to your response, we get our replies and basically just forward them to customer care to follow up with them and help them opt out of that reminder if they no longer want to be reminded of a specific birthday or anniversary, or potentially figure out how we can make it up to them.
So another thing I wanted to touch on, so a lot of times we use internal content for dynamic content. Do you guys ever pull any external content into your emails? And if so, how do you guys do that?
Yeah, UGC works great for engagement. Anytime we use user-generated content, the click-through rate is always higher than if it's just a product. So we definitely utilize all of our social media as content, and that always works really well.
So I think end of the day, we're looking at dollar per email as the ultimate KPI for whether or not content is working. I think that's unfortunate, because then we are missing opportunities where we're increasing engagement or increasing lifetime value with a customer by using user-generated content. We've served up like Instagram photos in our emails, or live video from YouTube using using Live Clicker. And basically, we see that the engagement does increase, but ultimately, if I have sub-products instead of a banner or a video embedded, the dollar per email is going to be higher. So I think with regards to like the sub-products themselves, we've been able to help our workflow and actually pull directly from our site using like Live Scrape, which becomes especially useful as, during Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, products start dropping off our site. We don't have to manually work with our merchandising to say, okay, not only does it need to drop from the site, but it needs to drop from the email. So that's something that's been really useful for us.
Okay, great. And then can you talk to us a little bit about the decisioning process around dynamic content, how you guys decide, what you're going to do and how you're going to do it? You guys are closely tied with the merchandising team, I'm assuming, but can you just touch a little bit about that?
So at the beginning of the month, our merchandisers tell us what their big stories are for that specific month, and then we take that and make creative stories out of what they want us to push. And we always run everything by them, we always test everything, and that seems to be a good workflow for our company. I mean, I know everybody's different, but that works for us.
Yeah, I think we make assumptions and then we test into them. So for a while we were doing a household income test. It was pretty interesting. So basically making assumptions that if you make more money, you're going to want to spend more money on our site. So we served up higher price point products. And that failed pretty miserably. And then we kind of pivoted, and instead of looking at household income based on third-party demographic data, we looked at the data the customers were actually providing by shopping on our site. So looking at customers with a high AOV and serving up high AOV products to them worked really well. So, again, we make assumptions. A lot of them don't work out, but then when you find the ones that do, you stick with them and you iterate.
Yep. All right, so do you guys, we've heard a lot about these templates. Are you guys leveraging these dynamic templates, or?
Yeah, we have a few different dynamic templates, and we use them. After you get everything set up, it definitely saves time to have templates you can just use over and over again, and there's so many different versions that you can push out. It's a huge time saver.
So yeah, talking about the versions, how are you guys QAing all of the versions?
So we have, when we do test sends, we can do it by lead, by email address. So we look at the person's data and then we test send it to ourselves to make sure that it's populating the right data.
Okay. And you, Matt?
Yeah, so I spent about a month using AmpScript coding out a dynamic template on our side where it basically gives us the ability to just upload an Excel document into a data extension and then basically doing lookups on that data extension to pull the content based on, whatever demographic flags or, whatever flags we want to use. To test, we basically just set up a seed list with those same flags and send out all versions to ourselves. Obviously, as you get closer to one, it becomes very difficult, but then you kind of have to look at the different content blocks and kind of test those and hope that when they kind of come together that the message kind of comes through.
Okay, great. And to round us out, why don't you guys give us 2 to 3 of your top tips that you would give to your fellow marketers around dynamic content?
Test, test, and test, and make sure your data is accurate.
Yep.
Okay, everybody, test, test, test.
Yeah, no, obviously, like I was saying before, it's good to make assumptions if you're then going to go in and test and prove them out. Like, don't make assumptions and just continue to roll with them. Not all females like pink shop now buttons, I can promise. So, test.
Okay, so we can open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
I wanted to play off the point about Matthew that you made about different audiences responding differently to these types of emails. And I'm curious, because we sort of have a tendency to believe that everybody, when we personalize, everybody will respond equally. And I'm curious if you're seeing different audiences receptive to this kind of communication. It sounds as if, you mentioned that people who are frequent buyers of yours tended to respond more than people who maybe only bought a couple of times a year. There may be some obvious reasons for that apart from the dynamic content, but are we seeing any evidence that there's sort of different buckets of audiences that like this kind of exchange in their email and other audiences that don't? I'm curious about that.
So correct. What we find is the people that are engaging with us more like the dynamic content. And if you're a one and done, you needed a pair of shoes, you just came in and then you left. I mean, we can populate your browsing behavior and they're not engaging. They don't seem to care as much. But if you're a loyalty member, those people are definitely, they love to see their points. They love to see the store that's closest to them and they're actively engaging with us. So that has a huge impact. And then we also notice that the higher spenders are almost expecting that more personalization, and so they're also more engaged with us.
Are you getting any ideas from your feedback? You said that you're seeing the replies to the emails, and I'm wondering if they're if not only you're seeing negative replies, but those who are in that dialogue and like this exchange, are you getting ideas from them as to what they'd like to see?
No ideas, but definitely positive comments. Like if there's a huge storm coming through, we'll send out an email about snow boots, and people are, oh, thanks, I actually needed a pair, but I haven't actually received any ideas as far as what people would actually like to see that we're not currently doing.
And does it raise the bar? I mean, have you ever tried turning it off and see how people respond
we
to
have
not getting that anymore?
We have not turned it off.
All right, we're going to move this over to the roundtable at the end of the morning. Elizabeth, thank you very much.
Yep, no problem.
And also an emailer with some unique challenges when it comes to deliverability. Ashley Madison, who you might imagine may have some deliverability issues, to talk about and to take your questions. So think about your questions that you have, particularly of Comcast, in your own issues with deliverability. To take the lead and start this discussion off, we have back our email editor, Jess Nelson.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be back. As Steve mentioned, we'll be talking about deliverability today, which, although it's not really quite the sexiest marketing topic, it is absolutely so important.
But she did bring the sexiest panelists, so that'll...
We do have, actually, I'll just let you introduce yourself now.
Sorry about that. So Matt Molesky, I'm the Vice President of what we call Service Policy Assurance now with Comcast, which encompasses our customer security, privacy, and acceptable use policies across all of our products and services. And part of that responsibility, we have our anti-abuse mail platform, inbound and outbound, trying to protect our subscribers' inboxes. And so that's the reason why I'm here.
Great. My name is Mark Totelevic. I'm the VP of Email Delivery and Planning at Ashley Madison. Some of you might have heard of the brand. We've had an interesting year and a half for sure. But I've always wanted to do one of those raise your hand if things. So I'd like, could you raise your hand if you've signed up for Ashley Madison? Oh, that's weird. Okay. But I'm in charge of everything email related at the company, minus acquisition. Yeah, my goal is to stay in the inbox, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So I was actually just reviewing an old return path story that I wrote based on kind of global deliverability rates, and they're actually really quite poor. A quarter of promotional emails aren't making it into their correct inbox. We've been talking over the past 2 days about different storytelling techniques and how to engage with subscribers, but if the email isn't landing in the inbox, that there's just going to be no engagement. So to start, I kind of wanted to start with authentication, which has a myriad of different acronyms. We have SPF, we have DKIM, we have DMARC. But authentication is a way to prove really you as senders are who you say you are. So kind of to start off, I know that DMARC is still relatively new in the industry, so I'm curious to hear your perspectives on whether, can marketers be fine with just SPF and DKIM, or do they really need to authenticate with DMARC as well?
I'll start, but I think that as with all authentication, if you think about your experiences across other avenues in which there's authentication, multi-factor, and so forth. It is the layers of authentication that allow you to become more and more certain that the person you're interacting with, in this case, the person who's trying to connect to our mail servers and deliver that mail, is who they say they are. My opinion would be that the best strategy would be to implement all three, because each of them has pros and potentially cons, but they're each an evolution of authentication. So SPF is going to address certain things, DKIM is going to address others, and then what DMARC does is it takes, absent SPF and DKIM, really DMARC has no value. So to leverage DMARC is what's filling in the gaps of providing information back to the senders about their mail, wherever it may be coming from, as well as allowing you to tell us what you would like us to do with your mail when the authentication fails. So I'm a fan of all three. None of them are perfect, but if we don't get to a point where we are working from sort of a basis of authentication, it makes the rest of the email ecosystem a riskier playground.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree with that. We use all three, and but I would say recently we've had troubles with maybe some trust issues with our customers for whatever reason. But that's one of the things, is that authentication creates trust, and that they know it's coming from you. And you also protect your brand. DMARC, if you set the policy right, it's I think it's something like 70%. You can reject 70% of the emails that are trying to spoof your brand and things like that. So it's very important.
Mm-hmm. So beyond authentication, I was hoping to hear you guys describe a couple of really kind of red flags for deliverability. What should marketers be aware of? For example, quality of mail, right? You want to have your clean email list. You want to avoid, spam traps. Kind of what are red flags for deliverability?
From an ISP perspective, the deliverability I see as it's really a state of mind, right? It's a commitment to an overall process that really begins all the way from acquisition through to clicking the send, and then not even just ending there, but then taking that data that you get back from your campaigns. For me, I think that the red flags are simply really the basics, which may sound technical, but it starts with DNS. Who are you? What are you publishing about who you are? What IP space you're using to send your mail? The authentication protocols that we talked about. So doing those things right, and simply just in the introduction of you as a sender to the receiver, telling the truth about who you are and having that be appropriately formatted is really the first big step, because everything builds upon that.
Yeah, and I think transparency is the big thing, obviously, and then how you're acquiring your email addresses. In the dating space, believe it or not, there's some gray area acquisition practices. So with those, and I would say our acquisition guys aren't my best friends for sure. We have a lot of arguments about different kinds of traffic, and but the thing about emails, you can show them where you're having problems and where that's coming from, as long as you're attributing everything properly. So that's the big thing, is making sure we're attributing our traffic properly, and we know where the problems are essentially, and where the spam traps are coming from, or the unengaged users and things like that. So, but engagement is king now in email, I think, and I always wanted there to be like a dislike button in Facebook, where you can like it, but you can also dislike, and email has that option, right, where people can basically hit the abuse button and tell you what you're doing to me is, I don't like this. So, you're just taking that feedback and making sure you're doing the right thing.
So I think probably every email marketer's nightmare is being temporarily or potentially permanently banned, from their email server. So I'm kind of curious if at that moment, what steps can a marketer begin to take to put their really email program back into shape to start to improve deliverability?
Start with that one.
Yeah, sure. I've also worked at YesMail and ReturnPath, and I've had tons of clients. We've seen clients have issues with all kinds of things, spam house. The range is out there. So, but in general, you just have to look at your list. Where did you acquire essentially the bad addresses that are causing your problem? That's the biggest thing. Is your list is what's caused the problem. You're not going to get banned for sending too many emails. You might get bulked or blocked because of your reputation, but getting banned, it means there's a fundamental problem with the way you're acquiring addresses.
Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory there. I mean, if you're not conducting good list hygiene practices, if you're not paying attention to where you are acquiring your email addresses, and then how you are attributing those to their source, so that when there's a problem, you can say, let me turn off that flow of email addresses, because it's just not doing me any favors. That's really the key here.
I'm curious how kind of testing comes into play here. We've talked a lot about testing promotional campaigns, but I think also testing can help marketers differentiate those bad email addresses versus ones that'll actually work. So I'm curious, I don't know, Mark, if you guys do a lot of testing, I would think you probably have had to revamp your program recently.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was just, making sure we had the right data sources. But then, beyond that, I guess, when we talk about testing, it's making sure, checking your inbox placement every day, checking your log file, your bounces. Your bounces will tell you a lot. And I don't know how many people do that, but, I've done it. We did it at YesMail all the time. We went through all the bounces. And I do it now at Ashley Madison. Is basically, what are the ISPs telling me through their bounce backs, and obviously we're looking at soft bounces and things like that, and there's the timeouts, all kinds of things. Are we sending too fast? Are we sending too slow? And one of the benefits I have is we have our own MTA, so we have full control over how fast we're sending everything, and that's been a huge benefit to me. Just being able to taper off when I need to, and I can ramp up if I want to. So yeah, that's how we do things. So.
And then, Matt, I know that when we were doing our kind of panel preparation, you brought up something that I found really interesting. You were describing how when an email sender is blocked or banned, Comcast, you try to explain what's going on and give them resources to understand kind of why they've been banned and what steps they may need to take. Could you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, and this is my own personal belief, but I know that there's others in the industry that ascribe to the same thing, is that we really value transparency, trying to lift the veil and make what is actually very complex, but doesn't necessarily have to be as complicated as it historically has been, to make it more manageable. I think that by sort of pulling back the veil and being as transparent as we possibly can about the rules that we have in place, about the rates at which we prefer to receive email, about the things that you need to do in order to send effectively into our domain. These are all things that benefit the overall ecosystem, because at the end of the day, the customers that you have, that you're trying to communicate with, are also my customers. So we share customers here, right? The other thing that we share here is what we perceive to be a valuable communication channel, which is email. So we're trying to protect not just our customers from bad email, but we're trying to protect this channel, which we do believe is valuable. And that's something that can only be achieved with a true partnership between all of the players in the ecosystem, from the blacklist providers to the senders, the receivers, and everybody in between. And so that's kind of how I perceive it. And at Comcast, and again, other providers as well, we have our Postmaster site. So if you can go to postmaster.comcast.com or postmaster.xfinity.com, and it will give you the information around what are the things that drive a block, right? When you get your block, your message that hopefully you see less and less of over time, it contains a link that brings you to more information that says you're on this block list or you're on this series of block lists, and here's how you can work to get removed. So that transparency, that open communication, we also field, we talk differently at Comcast a little bit about the difference between our customers and our subscribers. So we have, obviously our subscribers are also our customers, our primary focus. But then anybody that needs our assistance, or the senders are customers of our email platform at a particular point in time. When they're trying to connect and they say hello, they become a customer of that platform as well. So that's kind of my philosophy on it.
And I just think, personally, the ISPs have almost done us a favor as marketers in a sense, because 7 or 8 years ago when I started in email, when I told people I was in email marketing, like, oh, you're responsible for all the spam that I get. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not what we do. We help marketers sell things to you. And the response is totally different now, I find, because the users are protected from unwanted messages and getting bombarded, essentially, to a point now where it's, oh, you send me messages that I buy things from, and no, I have a better understanding of what you do. And it's probably because they're better protected, they use their email more, because, who wants an oversaturated inbox? Not me, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I actually kind of wanted to give a little bit of extra time for questions, because I would assume deliverability can be so technical. It's a mixture of art and science. I'm curious, if we do kind of a raise of hands, who is completely and utterly happy and content with the deliverability rates of their email marketing? Okay. Not very many, right? I'm curious, are most of you kind of are on the average where maybe 20% isn't going through, or? Yeah, I see some nods. Okay. So, we do have our experts here. If you have any questions as to how really you can improve your own deliverability rates of your campaigns. The gentleman in the middle of the microphone.
Keep your hand up so I can find some.
Right. Hi, I'm Julie Cooner from the Hertz Corporation. My question is about IP warming. So we've got several providers here. We tell you we can get you set up on our brand new cloud platform in a day. Cool, but now we have a whole new IP address. Can I really just send out several million emails on day one? Something when we moved to the cloud platform, we had a little bit of deliverability issues. What are your best practices and ideas for IP warming and actually letting people know that now we're not sending from Hertz.com anymore, we're sending from our cloud platform, but we're still Hertz?
So no, I would not send out all of those messages on day one. Next question. No. So the IP warming process is something that obviously is is a real challenge because it does take time. There's a reason why that happens, because at today's in today's world, the IP address is one of those things that we can use to assign that number to a domain who has a reputation and so forth. So when you're making that change from ESPs or between ESPs, then that obviously introduces a challenge. So running those things in parallel, not doing a hard cut from one, having some sort of overlap helps, and then ramping up that volume over time allows you to reestablish that trust and be like, oh wait, we knew Hertz over there, and now I see Hertz over here. Oh, it is the same thing, right? I'd like to move to a world where we can move further away from IP as that primary indicator and move more towards a domain-based reputation, because I think that allows greater flexibility. We also have IPv6, which exponentially increases the number of potential IP address and combinations and so forth. So to me, that's where I'd like to see it go, is if we can get it at, you would still have to build reputation at the domain level, but that introducing a new IP as a trusted domain and a known domain would be less painful than it is today.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is trust is earned, right? So when you're starting in the new IP address, essentially it's really dependent on how people are responding to your program. So trust is earned through your actions, and if your consumers are responding and clicking and opening, then the faster you're going to be able to ramp up those IP addresses. But that's essentially it. You just have to be patient, and your business is going to have to be patient, and depending on the company, it can take 15 days, it can take 30 days. Sometimes it takes 60, depending on what you're doing. So,
I'm curious, when you talk about kind of ramping up email volume over time, could you give an example with more kind of concrete numbers? Like, on day one, can you send 1,000 emails, or should it really be in the hundreds, or potentially a dozen?
I don't think that you can really ascribe a number to it. I think that each sender's historical trends is helpful, but obviously with the new IP address, I think I would be starting with sort of your most effective campaigns to your most engaged subscribers, so that you can build that up over time. It also will eliminate some of those factors of, remember, when you come in with a new IP address and the way things work today, you're brand new, I don't know you. And so I need to figure out who you are and what you're doing. And that's why we have the ramp up thing. So I would say, yeah, stay out of the millions, don't do these big spikes. Use a consistent growth pattern so that we don't just, again, turn it on after 3 days. It's just that consistent increase in volume over time to sort of get you back to what are your basic typical levels.
Hi, Anthony Siciliano with Thrifty, also part of Hertz. So I know in my experience, and something we're actually doing now, is a lot of companies try to apply their own engagement rules to their email databases to manage deliverability. Hopefully emailing the most engaged people and the most recently engaged people will help to increase your deliverability. I know, with a previous company, we had a lot of problems with Comcast specifically, and we had very, very limited engagement recency rules applied to that, partly in fear of email addresses being recycled rapidly, other people's usernames being reused. Is there kind of a sweet spot or some way that you would recommend where you would start from as far as how you're managing your recency rules to help your deliverability?
I think from our perspective, it's not something that I would want to spend a tremendous amount of my team's energy trying to manage. I think that what would be better to look at is sort of the overall trends of your customer base. What is the industry saying? Typically, best practices that are out there talk about either that 60 to 90 days, some activity in there being your sort of most, engaged in that less than time period. But for me, I've really tried to have us focus more so on, rather than looking at authentication and engagement and all of the different elements here, if we can laser focus in one particular area and say, can we advocate for what is the most important thing right now for folks to do, and then build upon that foundation, I would come back to authentication, right? The more we know about who you are, and if you can be trusted, it really sets the rest of the balls in motion. And then if we can get to that baseline, then the engagement stuff, I think, really solves for itself. I think it's almost an opportunity for us to essentially be too cute. There's reasons to do it, and I understand them, but I think that if we're not authenticating mail, then we're just simply moving to some other thing that will say, well, maybe this will help us stop spam, or maybe this will help us identify if something is bad or good. And I think, how about we start with knowing who's sending us and connecting to our mail servers? That's a better place for me to try and start and focus on.
Hey guys, first time caller, what? Yeah, no, I'm getting there. Thank you, Daddy. Dennis Damon, Return Path. So, over the last several years at some of these different events, we've had some debates about that there's a lot of fear and self-loathing within the marketer side of things, and saying that marketers are being too chicken shit to send too much email. And there's been some individuals that have said that, no, you should be sending as much email no matter what, because you have to, it's not about quality, which it always should be. I kind of was hoping maybe you could sort of talk a little bit about engagement and really the truth of the matter when it comes to actual email, that marketers really need to take a look at exactly what we've been talking about, I think, here as well, which is quality over quantity, and not going down some of these routes that we've heard some rumors on the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen those discussions as well, and I disagree. I mean, I think that's kind of part of the debate. Is I agree with the quality over quantity argument for sure. That might be my background. I come from yes mail. That's how we got our clients to get into the inbox, and then Return Path. Obviously, when I was there, that's what we preach. So we always go, for our list, we always look at people that if you've opened and clicked an email in the last 6 months. Our life cycle is probably different than a lot of people's, but we look at 6-month engagement usually is kind of our indicator that you're not interested in hearing from us anymore. So why are we going to keep filling up your inbox with our brand? You'll come back. We'll do some PR stunt and you'll see it and you'll come back if you're going to come back. So that's how we do things. So.
Yeah, I would also think that it's just a counterintuitive proposition there. So absolutely, we want to get to a point where we can send the maximum amount of email or any type of communication that we possibly can. But in my world, that has to be built on a foundation of trust, right? It is upside down to say, let me begin with volume and then try to achieve a depth of a relationship. And I think that the ability to sort of organically grow those relationships in all the areas that we've talked about in the whole life cycle, from real solid approaches to sort of onboarding, to the messaging that goes into it, the reason why we have so many people doing copywriting and strategy and subject lines, all that stuff. Build a depth of relationship that allows them to bubble up and organically grow to volume and mass, right? Instead of trying to just simply, if I just keep making my funnel bigger, then I'll just end up with more money at the end. And it's not as simple as just the math, even though the mathematical equation, when you put it on paper, sure sounds real simple. But there's just way too many variables that the difference between making money now and the lifetime value of that relationship, I think, is where it breaks down.
Ryan Phelan at Destra. So, just in case I get in trouble with Comcast, what kind of scotch and steak do you like? One of the things when I was on the agency side is somebody would be blocked, and the question I would get is, oh, we're spending so much money with XYZ, we'll just call because that'll get us out of the spam folder. Can you talk about that thought, or the thought that, hey, if I call Matt up after this show, he can get me out of the spam folder, or if I spend a lot of money with Comcast, that'll get me out of the spam folder? Talk about what the process is and how you try to remove yourself from those biases that would give access, right? Because I think there's a misconception that just because I spend money, it's going to save me.
So I think the biggest thing is going back to transparency. So the transparency that I'm talking about is not me getting onto a stage and talking about my philosophy around how we do email. That's one small slice of transparency that only affects the folks in this room. So the broader we can be with transparency by putting all of this information out on the website, by providing pseudo-automated means for folks to get information and potentially request removal from blacklists. These are all the things that allows us to achieve that scale. Also, because part of my job is policy enforcement, compliance, and so forth, it's really important for us from an integrity standpoint to be agnostic as we can be about the content. I hate the fact that as an industry and as an ecosystem we rely so heavily on content filtration, right? Mm-hmm. The reason why we do that is because all of the other steps that get to the point where we have to to scan content to determine if it's spam or not are broken down. We don't have enough authentication. So if we can move from a world where we're more authenticated, I don't have to scan as many emails, I can be truly agnostic about the content because I know who you are. I know that you're sending email and that you're trusted. So let me allow you in that inbox to now determine amongst yourselves who's going to have the best marketing strategy. These conferences, I think, are much more valuable when we're talking about real, in-depth mechanisms to grow our businesses through email than when we're trying to say, how do we game a Gmail, Hotmail, Comcast, Yahoo, whomever, right? I think it takes our focus off the real ball, which is growing our business and expanding our customer base.
I think also kind of when it comes down to authentication, it's like vaccines. The more, if everyone had all of the different levels of authentication, then your job would be much easier to manage, I would think, right? As well as it would be protecting the end user and their inbox. And I think email, in terms of PR, is taking quite a bit of a hit over the past year. And phishing still remains quite a critical issue, and people are losing a lot of money from it.
And phishing, impacts enterprises, individual end users, your customers and so forth. Anytime we have an email address and a combination of an email address or password for some aspect of experience with our products, we introduce the vector for someone to say, I want that. Right? And because customers have too many passwords to remember, they simplify their lives and they say, well, let me just have one, or let me just have one or two. So you don't need to work as hard as you should in a world where we don't have multiple layers of authentication to steal someone's credentials, have them give them to you because you've hijacked a brand, and then leverage that across all of our brands, right? Because if I'm using one email address and password, whether it's with Hertz or whomever the folks are, chances are I'm going to get some hits on some multiple things, including my bank, my social, in other words.
Yeah, and if you're getting blocked or you're having issues getting in the inbox, I mean, again, the best place to go is your bounce log file. A lot of the transparency that Matt's talking about is there. They'll tell you if you've been CloudMark fingerprinted, if your content's the problem, or if it's your IP's reputation. There is feedback in those places.
We are going to move this to our roundtable on this very topic, but before I do, special thanks to Matthew for coming. It's not always easy to get ISPs to come to a conference like this. There's not necessarily a high percentage in that forum, so we really appreciate that you came and talked to us from your perspective. And also, Mark, you guys from Ashley Madison, your parent company, you guys have come to several of our conferences and always been very candid about the special challenges that you face and how you're overcoming it. So thanks to both of you, and to Dennis Damon from Return Path, who helped us set this panel up. Thanks, everybody. And we're going to move to roundtables now. Do we have any